Okay, folks. So remember how when Jay Bhattacharya was appointed head of the NIH, we thought, oh, they're finally something we can get behind. How bad could this be? Certainly, there's no way that Trump's subservience to Israel can interfere at the NIH, could it? Well, here we go. Glenn Greenwald, under new guidelines released by the National Institute of Health, any medical researchers will have all funds terminated if they support a boycott of Israel. They can support a boycott of any other country or even other U.S. states, just not Israel. So here's the highlighted text. Sorry, I got to full screen this here. Effective with the issuance of this notice, the following terms and conditions applies. Recipients must comply with all applicable federal anti-discrimination laws material to the government's payment decisions for purposes of 31 U.S.C. blah, 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 whatever the numbers are. Discriminatory prohibited boycott means refusing to deal, cutting commercial relations, or otherwise limiting commercial relations specifically with Israeli companies or companies doing business with Israel or authorized by, licensed by, or organized under the laws of Israel to do business. Wow. By accepting the grant award, recipients certifying that they do not engage and will not, during the term of this award, engage in a discriminatory prohibited boycott, obviously specified Israel above. A research institute could be close to developing treatments or cures for cancer or Alzheimer's, but will lose NIH grants unless they certify they don't support a boycott of Israel. I was happy Dr. Jay Bhattacharya was made NIH director given his free speech advocacy, and yet, ... Yet indeed. So Lee Fong had a great piece about this, and encourage you guys to check out Lee Fong's Substack. See, Lee Fong does independent media the right way.
Yes.
He's the guy who keeps the standards high, right?
Yeah, you know what? I do not always agree with his takes, but they're always honest.
Yes.
They never read like, well, that was a profitable take.
Right, exactly. Yes, so he says he has the same issue we have. He'll gain subscribers and lose them and gain them and lose them. That's how you know you're doing something right. So leefong.substack.com is worth it. Trump administration enacts vast censorship of American scientists over Israel. Research institutes and universities may engage in boycotts or divestment to pressure any country or government entity in the world. Recent institutional boycotts include measures to protest corporations that do business in North Carolina and China. That right no longer exists when it comes to protests of Israel. Researchers and university employees who engage in certain nonviolent protests or political expression over human rights conditions in Israel may risk civil and criminal penalties, according to a new policy unveiled by the National Institutes of Health yesterday. The agency, the largest public funder of biomedical research in the world, touches virtually every corner of the scientific community. The blanket boycott suppression is a radical expansion of so-called anti-BDS rules that restrict Americans from boycotting or simply advocating divestment from Israel-related businesses. The new NIH policy, which mirrors anti-BDS laws applied to contractors in 38 states, now silences hundreds of thousands of researchers. It applies to all domestic recipients of new, renewal, supplement, or continuation awards issued starting April 21st. Simultaneously, the administration is waging a wide-ranging showdown with several universities. The fight hinges on several issues, including the issue of academic research and speech rights regarding Israel. Federal research funds to Harvard, Columbia, Cornell, and other schools have been revoked or frozen, in part in order to force local universities into adopting speech codes related to Israel and to allow the government to place various Middle East studies departments into academic receivership. Such brazen attacks on the First Amendment have only accelerated. Just as other forms of censorship are justified as necessary tools to combat hate, misinformation, or bigotry, the Trump administration and its allies have argued that draconian measures are necessary to stop the scourge of anti-Semitism. David Friedman, the former Trump ambassador to Israel, spoke at an Israeli government conference last month and discussed the need to crack down on anti-Semites using government power. So this is the guy who had Mike Huckabee's job from 2017 through 2020. Here he is, Trump's accountant and Israel ambassador. Oh, there you go. Talk about hiring people close to you. David Friedman boasts about how governments like ours have the power to define anti-Semitism, to silence and deport critics of Israel.
Hey, you've been doing my books for a long time. You want to be the ambassador to Israel?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You guys are good at that, I hear.
On the right,
I hear you people are naturals.
Right.
On the right and on the left, I'm an equal opportunity condemner of anti-Semitism.
You're alluding to Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, none of them are any good. On the right, on the left, I don't like any of these anti-Semites, and I'm not shy about it. But the government, the United States government, or the government of France, or the government of any other country, has the power to rein in anti-Semitism in a much more effective way. And you know, people say, well, you know, the governments are not in the business of changing the way people think. That's true, but, you know, to my thinking, most people who are, you know, anti-Semites, most of these people running around, we're not going to win their hearts and minds because they don't have hearts and they don't have minds. So, you know, how are we going to, there's no reason to think we're ever going to convince them, but we can deport them, we can put them in jail, we can make their lives miserable, we can cut off their funding, and that's what the Trump administration is doing for the first time.
There you go. The new broadside to reshape NIH funding will ripple across all major research areas and impact tens of thousands of grants. The NIH's $48 billion budget helps fuel a wide variety of medical and scientific research and impacts nearly every major university in the country. Those found in violation of the Israel boycott speech-related rules could be forced to pay significant fines and could also be found liable for potential criminal penalties. The NIH rules are also wildly ambiguous. The policy defines illegal discrimination as any boycott limiting commercial relations with Israeli companies or with companies doing business in or with Israel or organized under the laws of Israel to do business. That broad statement could apply to a vast array of corporate entities. Nearly every Fortune 500 company has a subsidiary in Israel, and therefore any major corporation could assert the policy when silencing an American scientist. That's a pretty important point there. The censorship order also undermines the promises of the newly installed NIH director, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who faced suppression of his research about pandemic policies. He was resolute when he promised an era of free expression under his watch. Yeah, this hurts. And it's funny because, you know, I mentioned Jay Bhattacharya in the last show. I said, you know, even the guys who you like and you think, well, I'm glad they're there, they're going to end up with shit on their face by being too close to Donald Trump. And sure enough, the next broadcast, here we are. What an example this is. So here he is during his confirmation.
Glad you highlighted but I'm really glad you highlighted the role of censorship and restriction of scientific discussion. It was so refreshing to me to be allowed to speak my scientific views in Florida during the pandemic. I think the root problem, a pandemic is a very difficult thing. There's so many people are going to have different ideas in an environment of uncertainty. The root problem was that people who had alternative ideas were suppressed. I personally was subject to censorship by the actions of the Biden administration during the pandemic. Science, to succeed, needs free speech. It needs an environment where there's tolerance for dissent. And the reason I think why Florida did so well was that it provided an outlet for that dissent, so that the government of Florida, the state of Florida, could adopt the best ideas for its. It's not that no mistakes were ever made. You can't say that of any state in a pandemic. But in order to do well, you have to allow people to speak with each other openly, even when the ideas are controversial.
Unless they don't like Israel. All right. Yep. If you're working on a grant.
That's the exception.
If you're that close to curing cancer, but you don't like Israel, then your grant gets cut off. And, it's even worse than that. NIH moving to ban grants to universities with DEI programs and Israel boycott. So it's not just the Israel boycott that they don't like. They also don't like DEI. Talk about irony wrapped within a headline. They say, we're withholding grants from universities with DEI and who boycott Israel. So we're against DEI, except when it comes to Israel. In that case, we
Eh,
enforce DEI
In
type
which case, we
policies.
want DEI squared.
DEI squared, ZEI, Zionism,
ZEI.
equity, and inclusion.
Yep.
That's what we call it. That's what we call it. I mean, just to package that in a headline. I mean,
Yep.
it's just, it's incredible. And this is why we said, you know, being on the wrong side of Israel-Palestine has implications that you don't even realize. You don't even realize. It's not just a foreign policy issue. It's an economic issue. It's obviously a civil liberties issue, which this is, as well as a health issue. I mean, you talk about the politicization of science. That's what we heard from these people all through the pandemic. Oh, you're politicizing science and weaponizing science for political gain. Well, what could be a more comical example of that than this? What could be a more egregious example of that than this? And they're happy to do it. They're happy to do it if Israel wants.
Yeah, there was actually a story I was thinking about doing. There's a doctor who's here on a visa, who is the only person who's is doing research into this new diagnostic method of diagnosing cancer that could save potentially millions of lives. And they can't continue her research because they won't let her in.
Wow.
I mean, this is, I cannot imagine, short of hitting the country with a nuke, I can't imagine a foreign enemy destroying this country as thoroughly as this administration is in the process of doing.
Yeah.
You're not going to feel the impact now. They've been there 3 months. When this starts to really play out, total collapse in tourism, and hey, man, that's billions of dollars into the economy. Don't tell me it doesn't matter. It matters. That's airlines. That's airlines being able to run, to continue to function.
100%.
You feel, I just saw my friend up here who I met actually because she was on one of my tours, and she was very nice. I told her I was thinking about coming up here. She gave me her number. And she said she's going down to New York City on the train. She said she never did that before. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I'm not getting on a plane. They're turning upside down. They're lighting on fire."
Yeah.
So you want these airlines to have to cut more corners to stay in business? But when you look at this, you are going to overnight destroy the American university system, which attracts a lot of talent. And last I heard, the people on the right are the ones who are most comfortable with setting up new corporations and venture capitalism and Silicon Valley. They're the least likely to question that. So you don't have an issue with that basic concept of that being a generator of the country's wealth, right? So what do you think's going to happen when nobody wants to come here anymore? What's going to happen to these universities when you're not bringing the best and the brightest anymore? Not only is it going to destroy these universities, all those businesses that they have, places like Stanford, they have incubator labs specifically to cultivate these kinds of entrepreneurs and businesses. That's all going to dry up. It's all going to dry up. You are destroying the country. You are literally destroying the country. And I'm not saying it was working well before, but you know, there's an old Jewish folktale called "It Could Always Be Worse." We're very rapidly rushing headlong into what worse is going to look like. Like, talk to me in a year. Yeah, like it's 3 months in, man. You don't notice any difference, but you're going to.
Please clap.